Welcome to our Women in IP podcast. My name is Harriet Lahal. I'm the Digital Content Executive for Gately's marketing team, and today I'm joined by intellectual property specialists Catherine Ayers, Georgina Bagnall, and Pavin Munda. As part of World IP Day, we look to gain helpful insight into the issues women in the industry face and discuss what steps can be taken in the aim for equality. Welcome, everybody. Lovely to have you all here. If you could start by giving our listeners a little rundown on who you are and what you do, that would be fantastic. Pavin, I'll start with you if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. So I'm Pavin. I'm an assistant in the IP team at Gately. I've only just recently qualified, so I'm fairly new to the area, but yeah, really enjoyed it so far. It's exciting. It's a creative kind of area of law, and it's quite different to what I've done in the past.
Fantastic. That's amazing to hear. And what got you into this sort of sector? What really encouraged you here?
So I studied IP at my undergraduate degree. So that really piqued my interest. It wasn't really something I'd heard of before, but I thought it'd be just kind of interesting to kind of give it a go and see what it's like. And I absolutely fell in love with it. So much so that I decided to do it during my LPC as well, which is my postgraduate degree that every solicitor has to do. Although that might have changed now recently. And yeah, I picked it then again. And then having joined Gately, I realised that we had an IP team here too. So the moment I found out, I immediately got in contact with our IP department and found out if I could um, just train here and just train in IP. And yeah, I've just not looked back since. It's just great.
Oh, that's amazing. That's lovely to hear. Georgina, can I move on to you?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Georgina. I'm a patent attorney within the engineering team in Avon Jones. My background is in physics, so I can do engineering and physics-related inventions. And I recently qualified as a chartered patent attorney, and I qualified as a European patent attorney last year.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for joining. And Kathy, can we get a little background on you as well, please?
Yeah, I started life as a trainee patent attorney back in 1990, but moved over to the trademark side a couple of years later, and I've stayed there ever since. I'm work with Adamson Jones alongside Georgina, and I've been doing the job now for 33 years, and it's been the most wonderful career, and still is. Every day there's something new, and every day you feel like you're making a difference and helping your clients' businesses. So it is just the most amazing place to be.
Oh, that's amazing. That sounds lovely. So, just to get us all started, of course, we're all here today to talk about World IP Day and particularly being women in IP. What do you think makes this topic so important and makes this topic something that's worth discussing?
I think maybe the reason there's not so many women in IP is because no one really knows about IP. So things like this are important to get the word out there so we can have more women in IP.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Being on my undergraduate degree, it was clear that it was heavily dominated by males. Like our classes were pretty much, I think it was about 70-30 male to female ratio. So it was clear that it didn't seem to be an area of law that many women went into, which is a shame really, because I think it's a really good area to get involved in, and it's quite creative. And I think, yeah, it's just a shame that not many people are taught about it, and it's not really brought to anyone's attention.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you bring that up. So, do all of you feel like as you were entering this career, Georgina, I know that you mentioned having a background in physics. I know, Kathy, you've got a bit of a background in STEM as well. Do you find that a lot of women are sort of discouraged from pursuing these careers? When you started, did you feel like there was that same sort of inconsistency between the genders in these classes? And do you think there are any obstacles that particularly women face when trying to enter these careers?
For me, I didn't think anything like that, but I think I came in with a biased opinion because doing physics compared to IP, I think there's a lot less women in physics. So then coming into IP, there's a lot more women there. So I never really thought about it, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I was quite lucky. So I studied at Cambridge, and in my cohort of students, women were fairly well represented. I certainly found that the fact I'd been to a state school to be more of a problem, and more something that held me back when I was at Cambridge, rather than being a female. So that's kind of interesting, isn't it? It just didn't hold me back there. It did become more of an issue when I joined the profession, and the number of women sort of drops off a bit. But again, I was quite lucky. I started work at a firm which had a pretty good representation of women, not so much at senior levels, but certainly up to senior associate level, and people you could look up to, people who been there and done it. So you didn't feel so much like an outsider.
Do you think there's anything in particular that women do bring that you find that male innovators may not bring to the table? Why do you think it's so important to really uplift women innovators in particular?
For me personally, it's just a case of who you're working with, and I obviously working with men is fine, but working with women, I do typically find to be a lot easier. You're just on the same wavelength. So if I had more clients that are women, that would be better, in my opinion. So having more female innovators and therefore more women looking for patents and working with you would be great.
Let me know if you agree as well. But I do think with equality, but with equity as well, having a history of women innovators being ignored and having their work overshadowed, and there's loads of examples in STEM in particular that we are aware of now, but having that history of women who have been ignored for their hard work, uplifting now can be that level of equity. Is that something that you guys agree with or disagree with?
Ignoring women in innovation is massively unfair because we're 50% of the population. So, and I like the examples from Cedars, the crowdfunding organisation where women-led businesses have been crowdfunded very successfully, achieved way over their target investment, and continued and thrive as a result. They'll benefit all of us. Well, those innovations will benefit all of us.
Women's tech's very interesting as well from like a patent point of view. There's LV, the breast pumps. They do a lot of I think they've got a few in-house patent attorneys because, well, presumably their patent portfolio must be quite big. But that's really interesting, that they're portable and working on something like that would probably be a lot more interesting than working on some of the other engineering, manufacturing technologies.
Do you find that you feel represented now as women in IP going into that? I know that you mentioned that going into IP, it's felt like there were more women compared to something like a STEM background or with physics or anything like that. But at the current moment, with the current climate, do you feel well represented within IP or within upper management roles? Do you find that that's changed?
I suspect
I
in
would say
IP,
no.
I think that
Kathy, go ahead.
I was thinking that IP, I think, is not immune from the problems that all businesses face. In that, the further up you go, the less women are around, and a lot of that is because of taking career breaks, people wanting to work part time because of childcare and responsibilities. It's undeniably hard to manage a relationship where both of you are senior in your careers and you have children. It's a very difficult place to be. And I suspect that the earning potential for men is greater, and so a difficult decision is taken that it's the woman who steps back and focuses more on the children. And of course, there's the biological reason that if you are going to feed your baby yourself, then that's obviously a job that men can't do.
Yeah, of course. Just to go back a little bit, so I know going into these sorts of fields, it can be quite intimidating in a way. If the thought is out there that it's harder to get into these sorts of roles, what do you think is discouraging women from pursuing a job in STEM or a job in IP or pursuing law degrees? And what inspired you to make that jump, Georgina? Just to pick there, knowing that you went into physics, of course, that is very well known for being quite male dominated. And Pam, you mentioned in your class that sort of 70-30, that 70-30 percentage there, that ratio. What was it about IP, about STEM, about going into these careers that made you think, no, I'm really inspired and I'd like to pursue that, even if odds may not necessarily be in favour?
So for me, oh, go on, Georgina.
No, you go first.
I was just going to say, for me, I think what really caught my interest is just the creative side of things, and I think given the era that I've grown up in, like technology is just expanding so quickly, and it's just interesting to learn how that can be protected and how people are protecting their brands nowadays when it's just so easy to copy everything that people do like over the internet. It's just so hard to kind of monitor it. And I think it's just always been something that I've been kind of interested in growing up. And then when I studied it at undergrad, um, it's yeah, I was studying at undergrad. One of my tutors was actually a female, and she primarily focuses on trademarks, which is the side of things that I tend to deal with most at the moment. And I think just hearing her stories about just working in practice, and just how kind of amazing some of the clients that she works with and how creative they are, how different it is just from other areas of law. And that you do have that kind of hybrid nature if you decide to go down like the kind of law route where you can do a bit of contentious work, whereby you deal with trademark oppositions and infringement cases, and at the same time you can also deal with the admin side of things where it's a bit more non-contentious, and you can help with managing clients' portfolios, and just yeah, it's just varied is what it is, and I think you don't really get that in some of the other areas of law.
Yeah, this is fantastic. It's great to hear you had that sort of inspiration there from women that were already working in the field. That's great to hear that you had that kind of support from another woman as well. It's great that we can do that for each other as well, that we can lift each other up. That's fantastic to hear. Georgina, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say that just because there's not a lot of women doing something doesn't mean that should be a deterrent. I don't think I ever really thought about how many women there are in physics before I chose to do physics, or how many women there are in IP before I chose to do IP. I think if you enjoy something, you should do it.
Yeah, oh, it's great to hear. Do you think the amount of women, if you have that sort of mindset, that are pushing through and are actually pursuing these careers that they want to pursue and that they're interested in, do you think that's improving, or do you think that we're misinformed by assuming? Because I think I would naturally assume that it's improving.
I think maybe women in IP is probably improving, although I don't really know. So I've only been in IP for about 5 years. Each firm I've gone to has had a different representation of women. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's extremely male dominated. Definitely within the engineering side of things, it is typically male dominated. But that's to do with more of your technical background. So it goes to your undergrad. And then in physics and engineering, they're definitely male dominated.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think we were doing some research beforehand that said that patent attorneys must hold a science or engineering based degree. And do you think that's where the barrier really lies?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, training to be a patent attorney is pretty brutal on its own. So if you decide that you want to be a patent attorney and you don't hold a technical degree in the science or engineering, you've got to do that first before you even go into the training to be a patent attorney. So if you decide that, it's a big undertaking.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think can be done to raise the profile of IP as a possible career route? Is there anything that you think you would like to see in terms of changes? I know, Pavan, you mentioned earlier that you didn't even know it was an option, and once you did realise that, it was very encouraging and really inspiring. Do you think there's anything we can do before the fact, so while people are still in school and don't really know what options are available?
I definitely agree with that. So, like you mentioned, although I knew you could qualify as a solicitor in IP, I didn't know that you could just qualify as like a trademark or a patent attorney, and that it's a completely different route to what I went through. And I just think if that was brought up, particularly when I was doing my undergraduate degree, if that was brought up as an option to me, then it's definitely something that I would consider, given that I've always had that feeling that IP was kind of the area for me, and I've had that since the age of 18 when I first started studying it.
Mm.
Um, so for me, if that was just brought up as an option, I think it's definitely the route I would have taken. Um,
I mean, you don't have to have any particular degree as a background for being a trademark attorney. Um, but I do think that quite a lot of people dual qualify. So you will end up with trademark attorneys, quite a lot of trademark attorneys with a STEM background. And there'll be people like me who, at the time, I was qualifying as a patent attorney because my background was mainly in inorganic chemistry. The patent landscape wasn't that attractive. It's hugely changed now. And I do think the number of women in IP has increased a lot over the last 30 odd years because of the importance of biotech in all our lives. And quite a high proportion of women study that subject at university, and that feeds into more patent attorneys in that area.
Yeah, that's great to hear. It's great to see that improvement as well. What steps do you think, or practical steps wise, can we possibly do, that universities, that colleges can consider to encourage and to let people know what is available? What steps do you think would be helpful, or would have been helpful to you when you were at that stage in your career?
I think work
I think
experience
if
is hugely important. Um, I I used to be part of a scheme involved with University of Hertfordshire, and we used to have a
Mhm.
couple of students every year for a week to show them what IP looks like. That system all started because there was someone within the university who had been a trademark attorney, so he was very well aware of the career, and
Mhm.
he wanted to give his students an option of having an experience of it. Um, if all universities who had any kind of IP offering thought in the same way, then I'm sure there would be much less ignorance of the profession. But we are fairly small. There are I think, under 2,000 trademark attorneys in the UK. So we're never going to
Mhm.
be as well known as solicitors in general, but there is more, definitely more we could be doing.
Haven, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I was just gonna say the same thing. Just work experience would have
Mhm.
been really good. I remember trying to apply for work experience when I was younger at law firms, and what I didn't appreciate was something different, which is a trademark attorney firm. Um,
Yeah.
but it was so difficult just to try to get in and get your foot in. And I think what I always found that stopped me was I think a lot of people in different firms tend to um, you're more likely to get a work experience at a firm if you know someone at the firm already, and
Right.
not having someone that I already knew was in law, I think that was quite a barrier to me.
Mhm.
It's just something that it hasn't changed really, and I feel like it's still the same now. You'll always find that people tend to get work experience at a law firm when they know someone at the firm or that they know a partner at the firm, and that's usually the route in. And I felt like that kind of held me back from gaining the experience that would have been really helpful for me in IP.
Mhm.
It is really difficult to get into. It is really difficult to get into IP. I think Pavin's right in saying that if you know someone in law, it's easier to get the work experience, and then from work experience usually follows a possible job. But the way I got into IP, I got a job as a patent administrator to start with, and then I actually got my trainee role by emailing a partner at a firm.
Mhm.
So even though you don't know someone personally, maybe you can find something that you connect with them with. LinkedIn's really good for that. A certain topic that they're passionate about, maybe that you share that passion with them, and then emailing them or messaging them on LinkedIn and getting to know them that way, you can get your foot in to the IP profession without necessarily knowing someone before even considering IP.
Do you find that there are a lot of barriers to women entrepreneurs and those involved in innovation, so clients in this case? Do you find that they tend to struggle breaking into the same sort of industry as well?
I think we see very few female clients in our sector, but it is
Mhm.
growing. And the barriers in accessing finance, which, if you read any reports about what percentage of female-led startups have issues obtaining finance, it's much higher than for male-led startups. And because the industries we're involved in are disruptive, this new technology, so a lot of them are startups. So we are going to see fewer women around, but hopefully it will change. There are many positive stories out there. I used to be involved with the Best Businesswomen's Awards, which was an awards set up set up specifically for mainly smaller female-led businesses, and some of their stories were just amazing. There were, for
Are there
example,
any that
one
spring
woman.
to mind?
And there was one woman who was a specialist in waste management, which is obviously not a typical female area at all. There was a woman who was a falconer. There was a woman who'd made a career out of specialising in a very particular kind of cosmetic makeup, which enabled people who'd had seriously disfiguring accidents to lead a fairly normal life. So not what people think of when they think of, a makeup artist, but someone who is, there was horrible stories like a woman who'd had come out on the wrong side of an accident with a forklift truck. And really, her disfigurement was so bad, she just didn't go out because she assumed that people would think she was an axe murderer, basically. As I understand it, she had scars all over her face. And because of the specialist makeup she was using, she was able to lead a fairly normal existence. There's all kinds of stories like that. They don't get the publicity they deserve, and that's one of the reasons that the awards were set up, to try and address that.
That's fantastic. We'll definitely put some resources into our bio so people can check out more of their stories and can hopefully help out where they can. Do you think that Gately in particular has been quite useful in helping women thrive in the workplace that other companies can put into place as well? Is there anything in particular you can think of that we do?
Yeah, so we have Thrive, which is a women in leadership program that helps to support female talent in the company. It provides mentoring, provides training on just how to unconscious bias training for line managers to ensure that they don't discriminate against women, and just to ensure that all their colleagues are treated fairly. It's a great program to be a part of.
Perfect. And speaking of sort of that mentoring as well, um, is there anything that you think other companies can do similar to mentoring, but any sort of benefits that you think companies in general can help women with? So, for example, anything like maternity leave, any benefits like that, paternity leave as well, making sure there's that equal support there. I know earlier you mentioned, Kathy, that when, especially if you reach leadership roles, when you've got a heterosexual partner and you've got a heterosexual relationship, and you find that actually reaching both these goals are both quite important jobs, do you think that extra maternity, paternity leave can help women as well?
I think the issue is more that men feel they're discriminated against if they take too much paternity leave. Gendered roles, of course, disadvantage men as well.
Of course.
If you think about the uptake of physics in school, for example, at A level, apparently it's much less common for males to take up English literature, for example, at A level. The percentage of women studying English literature is enormous. So gendered roles and society's expectations don't really help anybody. They don't help men and they don't help women. So there needs to be a much greater acceptance of people just doing what they have to do to make their lives work for
Mm.
them, and for everyone to be
Yeah.
open to the idea that, it's not a disaster if your son takes an English literature A level.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
you know, or wants to take more of a role in rearing children than maybe society thinks is appropriate,
Mhm.
or some elements of society thinks appropriate. Um,
Yeah, of
you
course.
know, it should be open to everyone, but because if a huge proportion of decision makers in businesses are male, then inevitably people who want something slightly different from the normal, and there's a greater risk there they're going to be not have the outcome they want. So
Mm.
as more and more women get into leadership, it should be less of a problem,
Mm.
and hopefully people will be called out more for behaviour that's kind of anti-inclusive.
Speaking of inclusive behaviors, what inclusive benefits in a business do you think can be useful? What would you like to see more businesses doing? Something that Gailey might perhaps do, or something that you've seen? I know there's a lot of talk about flexible working at the moment, just in general. Is that something that you think can be encouraging? And if so, how?
When I work flexibly, um, my daughter has had some anxiety issues, brought on
Mm.
basically by the pandemic and being 13,
Of course.
which is a
Mm.
great place to be. Um,
Yeah.
and I work 3 days over 5.
Mm.
I find trademark work often has very tight deadlines and requires a degree of responsiveness. That means I basically have to be in the office every day. But it works well, I think, to work 60% hours. Clients get the
Mm.
same service more or less as they would get from a full-time employee, and I get more contact time with my daughter. It works
Mm.
well, and there's no reason why it shouldn't work well for nearly everybody. And that,
Yeah.
but if there's if there's an open conversation about what I can offer the employer and what they can offer me in return, what we can have, and people are prepared to think a little bit more creatively, then we all win. Basically, it's a win-win situation. It's not a question of somebody winning, somebody losing. It benefits us all.
Do you find that the salary options and the pay gap between men and women in IP and STEM in law is something that is improving, or do you think that's something that can be a massive hindrance to people choosing the career?
I'm not sure about discrepancy between men and women, but I do think there is a lot of salary transparency in IP. So, quite a lot of IP specific recruiters will publish salary surveys so you can see where your salary is in comparison to the average and what's low and what's high. And I think that's really important, especially when you're advocating for yourself,
Mhm.
for your salary for a new role or for a raise. That's really important to know, because I think that women typically will accept a lower salary because it's just a confidence thing. So having that kind of transparency, I think, is very attractive from a career point of view.
Is that something that you, Kathy, and you, Pavan, have noticed as well? It's something that you experienced when you were choosing careers and when you were developing careers?
I guess the salary surveys are useful, but usually if you look at the data, there's such a massive range. It becomes quite hard to compare. I mean, the salary for someone who's 10 years post qualification, for example, the range is almost, a factor of 100%. So
Mm.
it can then get a little bit less useful, but it's certainly more useful in the early years of your career when there's much more of a kind of going rate. Um, but you have to work on your own definition of success. What does
Mm.
success look like to you? Is it simply earning the biggest salary, obtaining the maximum bonus pot, or is it the people you're dealing with? Is it the quality of the clients you're dealing with? Is it the relationships you have with co-workers? All of those things are hugely important. And I feel that in some ways women have a bit more of an advantage here, in that society just doesn't expect us simply to go out for the biggest salary. So we have more flexibility. We have more ability perhaps to pick and choose what we want. Work-life balance, I think, basically is fairly good in IP. I mean, litigation obviously is another, court litigation that is another ball game. And I suspect the work-life balance is much more difficult there because of the length of time that court proceedings take, or the contact time into court, and then the meetings afterwards, which can go on long into the night. So, but thankfully, clients don't tend to sue and be in a trial every week. So no doubt you get periods of respite too. But I think generally, I mean, we're a hard-working profession, but it's not crazy hours like you'd see at places like JP Morgan and so on, banking and finance and that kind of thing. I don't know what your experience has been, Georgina and Pav.
Yeah, I think there's good work-life balance with being a patent attorney. So far, anyway. So far, so good.
Yeah, I think the same for me as well. But I think that's more focused just with Gately's kind of ethos in having a work-life balance. I know. I guess it's kind of sometimes different between attorneys and lawyers, where I think as a law firm, there's sometimes a bit more pressure on you to work those longer hours, and I think clients as well expect it a bit more if you're part of a law firm. And that's what I found with clients that we've had in the past, where they kind of expect you to be available at all hours of the day. But it is important to kind of set the barriers earlier on, and to say, no, actually, these are my hours that I work. After that time, you may or may not get an email from me. Otherwise, I'll respond to you the next day. But I think there can be a difference between law firms and trademark and patent attorneys in that respect, where I think the work-life balance can sometimes be a bit more difficult. But at Gately, I haven't had that problem. I find that the work-life balance here is quite good. You're encouraged to log off on time if you can. If you're having a bit of a quieter day, you are encouraged to log off, and you're not expected to just kind of hang around, just for the sake of hanging around. Whereas I think at some of the bigger law firms, I think there is always that expectancy that you're going to be available 24/7, and you should always have your phone on you, and you should always be checking your emails at all hours of the day, whether you're on holiday, whether it's a weekend. And I think at Gately we do that really well here.
Fantastic, that's great to hear. Is there anything that you guys think allies can do to be better allies? A lot of discussion about what an ally is and how they can be helpful, and if sometimes sort of virtue signaling can be a hindrance, if anything. But what do you think can be useful that listeners can take away with them to help reach that improvement and help reach the goals that we ultimately want to achieve?
I think, especially for men, maybe instead of assuming what might be best for us, asking women rather than making decisions that they think would benefit us, to have that conversation and discuss it and come out with an outcome that we're both happy with.
Do you find that's quite an issue that a lot of people do face? And I mean, in IP and STEM and in general, is that something you've had a lot of experience with?
I think shielding is like a bit of an issue, especially when you have the person that you report to as a man and they're assigning your work. Maybe they've got clients that they think might be not necessarily PC, and then they don't want to expose you to that. But then the answer is not getting you to not speak to that client because the issue is not with you, it's with the client.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Having that female role model, having someone that you can report to, having more women in positions of seniority, do you think that's something that we need to be sort of striving towards?
Yeah, definitely.
Interesting. And what do you guys think a supportive male role model can be? What do you think that looks like? do you have any experiences with male employers or male mentors that you think actually what they've done here has been fantastic and something we can that we can mirror?
Yeah, so for me, especially, I think John Buckby at Gately has just really helped with my career. He gave me the chance to train with him
Mhm,
and then pushed me for an NQ role here, as well as trying to get me involved on an postgraduate IP course that I'll hopefully be doing in September at Oxford. So without
congratulations.
his kind of backing, I think it would be really just difficult for me to even get my foot into IP.
Mhm.
So yeah, he's just been a massive help for me.
Yeah, fantastic.
I think Gately does things really well. I mean, I've
Mhm,
worked all my life with patent and trademark specialist firms who basically did nothing else, and
mhm,
transitioning to a bigger firm, PLC with you know tough standards and much more of a developed HR policy has been hugely
mhm,
positive. I really enjoy working with Gately, and and everything I see around me seems positive. Because obviously my eyes and ears are very much open, and and the
mhm,
transition has been so great. I just find it a very different kind of environment, and I think women need to look critically at the environment they're going into and not be too not have too rose-colored spectacles about what life could be like. Um,
mhm.
and large, well-run organisations are going to be better for women to thrive in.
I think there's a lot of integration between teams as well in Gately. So even if there's not a woman in leadership in your particular team, because all the teams do work together, there will be a woman in leadership that you can talk to get that experience that they've had so that they can help you with your career.
Well, that's great to hear. Um, is there anything that you would say to women who might be in not quite as good a position? So, for example, I know that you're mentioning other sort of smaller firms where all they do is sort of patent and trademark. And in those scenarios where a client may not want to work with women and everyone would have a terrible experience that way, is there anything that you would say to women who might be listening who are going through that type of experience and what advice you would give to them?
Yeah, I don't think I've ever had a client be difficult with me because I was a woman, although I suspect that they feel more emboldened to query charges, for example, than
Oh,
they would do with
interesting.
a
Have you had an experience
male.
with that or that you can think of at the moment, or is that more of a general something that you've noticed with a lot of not a lot of clients, but with quite a few?
Well, I mean, certain. I mean, if you've got an owner managed business,
Hmm.
um, the and if you've got someone who's an older individual who's not used to having an environment where women as their legal advisors can happen
Hmm.
even now. Potentially they are going to undervalue the work done by a woman. Um, Being great at your job helps, obviously, and being really clear on charging, what charging can be expected, and
Hmm.
standing up for yourself. Standing up for yourself, I think, is something that women possibly find more difficult. Like it is more
Hmm.
difficult if you are in minority, isn't it, to stand up for yourself?
Hmm.
So, but obviously, it's in your employer's interests for the client to be billed fairly for the work they've had done for them. So, the people above you will help, and you should lean on them and keep them advised, because nobody wants an employee in a situation of having a difficult relationship with a client, feeling they can't charge them fairly for the work they're doing.
I haven't just to add, I haven't had any bad experiences with the clients, but I have had clients assume I'm male. My name is quite gender neutral, and I think people sometimes find it difficult to know whether I'm a male or female. So instead of just writing my full name, so putting Dear Pavin, they'll put Dear Mr. Munda, and they'll just make the assumption that I'm doing law, so I must be a male, and I find that really difficult. I've had that for my whole life. It's just that assumption that I'm in law. Law's mainly dominated by males, so I must be a male too.
Mhm.
And I think that's definitely something that should change as well. Just the assumption by clients as well that
Yeah.
everyone who's in law is male, and if they're not sure, just ask, or don't ask, just put my full name, and that would be
Yeah.
absolutely fine.
Yeah, they can be absolutely fine too. Yeah, full
Exactly.
name instead of using he, him immediately, jumping to that conclusion. The more inclusive language can be a massive help. Perfect.
Definitely agree.
Yeah.
I don't understand why
Is there
people
any
just
sort of
don't Google.
final?
I mean, you can be fine. You're easy to find, no doubt, on LinkedIn. It's like, and
Yeah.
photo, yes. It's not hard, is it?
No, no. It's something that seems so straightforward and something so simple, but it can create a massive impact. Just that extra 5 seconds of just double checking or making sure that you're using inclusive language can be a huge, huge help.
Yeah, I've even had clients where I've jumped on a Teams call with them, and I've had a client say to me, "Oh, I thought you were a male,"
Oh,
and then just be shocked that it was me that was actually emailing them. So yeah, I didn't really know how to handle that situation at the time. I was quite young,
yeah.
and it's just difficult to know what to say, other than yeah, I'm a female. Yeah, a bit of an uncomfortable situation to be in.
Yeah, I can imagine that sounds horrible. I know it can seem like they're trying to break the ice there and make it into a joke of what they were thinking, but you just think it's not necessary, is it? If they were
There was just no
mistaken,
need to say it.
no, absolutely not. Are there any sort of final thoughts or anything that you guys were wanting to let listeners know? Any advice that you can give or anything that you think would be useful for listeners to walk away with?
I think the main thing is just not to give up, and if you feel like there's a barrier there, just try to push through it, and show people that yes, you're a woman, but that doesn't mean that you can't have a career in IP, or
Mhm,
that you can't have a career in law for that effect.
mhm,
I think it's just really important for women to just kind of stand up for themselves,
mhm.
and just act as a role model for women along the line, and to show that actually we can do it and we can get to those leadership roles too and be successful.
That's lovely. Thanks for joining the podcast today, guys. Thank you for listening to our podcast. We've included resources in our bio where you, as our listeners, can continue to learn more about this topic and gain the support you may need to progress in your career.